Badger fans, what is going on? Special guest today. One of the all-time greats at Wisconsin at the running back spot. We're going to talk about Bama, USC, freshman running backs, and get some of your questions into the show on Wisconsin. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Thank you so much for tuning in, as always. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Ryan Herring. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And man, with the great guests, we waste no time. We are bringing on that dude, Brian Calhoun. Badger fans know him. Before the show, we were talking where your 2005 season individually sits among the annals of NCAA history. You had 2,207 combined yards. That's the 31st best season ever.
That's like I was telling you, that's a lot higher than I thought. 2005 was pretty special year, especially being Coach Alvarez's, I guess, first time officially retiring. So it was a big year, and we went out with a bang with a win over Auburn in the Capital One Bowl.
Yeah, that was a more loaded offense, I think, than people tend to remember with some of the skill position talent.
Yeah, I agree. I think people forget how skilled we had, especially the players on the offensive side. Brandon Williams was a 1,000-yard receiver, which, in Wisconsin history, that's a pretty high claim. Owen Daniels ended up having a 10-year career in the NFL. So we had some pretty good offensive skill guys. And I think at one point we, broke the school record for most points or the best offense until I think the Russell Wilson year, but it was a pretty prolific offense.
Well, let's talk Badgers this year. Coming off the 42-10 loss to Bama, had the bye week. Where are you at 1 week after the bye? Like, what's your just general feel on this right now?
I think probably me and a lot of other Badger fans are kind of in this gray area, right? Where we are transitioning to, a backup quarterback who's started some games in the past, but now we're transitioning to this phase. We've had a week to kind of analyze and see where we're at. We're 2-1, which is always a positive. But now that the schedule gets tricky, right? Because there's a lot of Big Ten programs that have shown improvement. Indiana, Rutgers, Nebraska. Iowa looks like a solid opponent with the new offense coordinator they have. Mm-hmm. So I think we just kind of sit and reflect and look at, if it was me, and I would look at and see what are the things that we do really well on offense. Some Badger fans may feel like we don't do a lot of things well, but I think there are some things that we do well. And then what are some things that maybe we need to work on? So I would have spent that time during the bye week to really shore up some of the things we don't do so well, and then have a game plan ready for USC.
Well, let me ask you that specifically, because you've been through that. You've been through the bye week, college, NFL. How much better can you get in the bye week?
I think that's I don't know. I don't know if you can necessarily get better. You can get healthier if you have some guys banged up, so you get a little bit of rest. I think that you can get some guys ready who haven't necessarily had the reps previously in camp or in the first few weeks. I do think the plus side or the bonus side of the first 3 weeks is you got to see some players play, and I think some guys have shown and flashed on tape that deserve probably more reps. On the defensive side, Tackett Curtis, I think, has shown that he deserves to play a little bit more. The other linebacker, I think, is Allegro. I think, is that how you say his?
Christian Allegro, yep.
Yeah, I think he's flashed and shown that he deserves some reps. On the offensive side, we got to figure out how to get the ball into the playmakers' hands. Pauline Tretch, Dupree has shown some things as a freshman. So I think it's really a good week to evaluate and see, all right, what are the things we do well? How can we get our playmakers the ball and let them go do their thing? And so I think hopefully there was a game plan in place and figuring out a package of plays for some guys to get involved in the game.
Let me ask you this, because, again, locker room in football matters. Like, culture absolutely matters. It's not just the X's and the O's and the talent. As a player, how do you feel when a freshman is maybe taking – like, you want the best players to play,
yeah,
obviously. What's the dynamic there inside of a locker room, though, from a coach's standpoint, from a player standpoint, with the younger players starting to get more reps?
Honestly, what we did when I played is we all the running backs watched and the running back coach watched the film together. And so it's obvious when you look at the game film together and you're highlighting different plays and you see some young guys making plays. I mean, maybe it's a little shot to your ego a little bit, but like at the end of the day, and you really talk about family and team and doing it for the next person, you want the best person to play as a coach. I think it's tough when you have a true freshman, then you have a transfer senior. You have Ches, who's gone through a lot as far as injuries. It's tough to, push him to the side. And I don't think you need to do that. But if you realize, like, hey, we have a young guy, say like a Dupree, and he can offer some
Mhm.
things other guys don't, then let's put a package together. It could be screens, right? We haven't run a lot of screens in the last 2 years in this offense. It could be sweeps. We don't really run that much in this offense, but there's ways to get him the ball in space and let him do his thing. 5, 6, 7, 8 plays, and Ches and Walker could still take the ball to the carries. But Cade's also um, seems like he's played his way to earn some more reps. So now you have a crowded backfield, but at this point, you got to make it as fair as possible. All right, you're going to get 6, 7, 8 reps. You're going to do the best you can, and then after these 2 or 3 games, we're going to evaluate, and then the best guy's going to play. I mean, that's the most fair way to do it. But after 3 games, I think we got a sample size of the guys that deserve more reps.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I kind of wonder. This is another one I wanted to ask you on. I think some positions it's much harder to play as a true freshman, right? Like
Right,
offensive line, defensive line.
right.
I think running back, corner, receiver, it's easier. But is there any type of, I don't want to say protect them from themselves. Like these are young men at this point. They don't need protection. But like, is there a reason maybe they're trying to ease them in a little bit more from a running back standpoint?
I'm with you. I think it's in running back's an easier position to play as a true freshman. Now it's not easy, but it's easier compared to some other positions. Um, especially if you're talking about Dupree or a guy that's going to come in and play on third down. Well, they obviously got to know protection and they got to be able to protect. And that's usually the hardest thing for young running backs to learn and be able to do because you're not really asking a lot from a guy in high school to pass pro, right? You're just not. That might be the hardest thing, but I think his talent is evident and you can see it. And it's like a guy that has some juice, and you want to get the guys with some juice the ball. And that's the same with Pauling and some of those other guys. Like you can find ways to get them the ball. I remember, when I played with Coach White and Coach Chris, who were the OCs at the time, they had, I think Coach Chris called it Bob. So Bob was kind of like 10 to 12 plays for the skill guys on the offense. So think about Bob was Brandon Williams, O was Owen Daniels, and B was Brian Calhoun. So me. So there's 6 or 7 or 8 plays. Like, all right, these are the plays that are for these guys that can get them going. And it only has to be 3 or 4 plays, but you can run them out of multiple formations. And so and maybe it changes week to week or every few games. But it's like, all right, Brandon Williams, B. Will hasn't touched the ball. All right, let's go to the Bob section of his play card. All right, here's some plays that we can do for B. Will, or here's some a tight end screen for Owen, or here's a play or a couple plays for me. Like that was kind of how Coach White and Coach Chris did it. It's like, all right, we need to get these guys the ball, and here are the plays that we like the most that we can execute to be able to get our playmakers the ball. And I would suggest having some type of package, whether that's for Tretch, whether that's for Dupree, whether that's for Pauling. Like we really need to get the playmakers the ball, especially when we start going against some of these defenses, like an Iowa, like a Nebraska looks much improved. You got to play Penn State, right? We got to find ways to be able to move the ball and help our quarterback out.
No, I love that. I feel like that was one of the underrated aspects of Paul Christ, where he got a lot of criticism at times for being a little too, I don't want to say vanilla, but but he also leaned into what he did really well. and the pieces that he had really well. I thought he was always a little underrated in that aspect.
Yeah, I think sometimes, at the end of, say, a relationship, right, you forget about all the good times. You just focus on the then and now and the bad
Mhm.
times. And I think a lot of times he did a really good job of finding out who his playmakers were and really trying to get them the ball, right? And using their talent, whether it's a guy in space, whether guys in slot. Like for me, we did a lot of stuff where I was lined up wide or I was lined up kind of in the slot and ran routes and running tosses and running draws and running screens, right? Those are easy ways to be able to get the ball in your hands and then just let me go and do what I can do. So I hopefully we start moving forward and having a mix of, I hate to say air raid because clearly we're not really truly a Mike Leach, Texas Tech, old school, throw it all. We're clearly not that. But there's still ways where we can run the ball, but also get these guys the ball in space and let them do what they can do.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And I want to speak about that a little bit more coming up. We're going to talk about USC, Wisconsin going out there. Brian's thoughts on that matchup. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show over at FanDuel. FanDuel remains the number one source for all of your sports betting needs. FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network for a reason. It's fast, it's simple. I always say this, do it responsibly as always. But if you are doing it responsibly, it's a great time to spice up your weekend. NFL's going on. Baseball playoffs coming up. Basketball's not going to be far behind. College football. Y'all already know I'm on Wisconsin this weekend. I am. Like, people are giving me flack for it. I think people are getting a little off the wagon a little too quickly. Wisconsin plus 15.5. I think they're going to be able to run the ball. We'll see if Mr. Calhoun has any eligibility left. We actually have a question about that coming up. So we'll see if he can get in there. Over at FanDuel, bet $5, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's FanDuel.com, the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, let's get back into this awesome conversation. Get Brian Calhoun back on the show. I did get a question in here, man. And listen, the NCAA has lost a lot of its teeth. We have a question here. Any chance you have any eligibility left? Cujo will donate both of his knees if you lose yours.
No, unfortunately, I do not have any eligibility left. And I've talked to some former teammates. But Matt Bernstein's a good friend of mine. And I think with this offense, right, the idea of a Matt Bernstein or Chris Presley or some of the great fullbacks we've had, those guys wouldn't exist in this offense. But for a guy like me, a guy like Brandon Williams, a guy like James White, this offense would have been really great for because you get, guys who are maybe a little bit smaller in space. They can catch the ball at the backfield. I think it would have been great offense for us, but we did a really good job in kind of our pro style power offense as well. So no eligibility left, but they got some guys that got some juice, and I'm looking forward to watching them grow.
Well, before we get to UC, I want to talk about those guys specifically. What have you seen from? Because I think Badger fans expected a little more from Chez this year. I think he expected more from himself. Tyree as well, averaged 4.5 last year at Oklahoma. He's at about 3.5. Have you seen anything specifically on the running backs or maybe the running game in general, why it hasn't gotten off track?
One thing, I haven't watched, the run game that closely, and I'm obviously not watching film. I would say one thing that when I played, in a pro style or when you're the main running back, you're getting the bulk of the reps in practice. You're getting, I rarely came out during the game. And so, like for running backs or just any other position, just like receivers and quarterbacks, you have to get in a rhythm. And sometimes, like, you get in the rhythm of a game, and a series can be 3 plays, a series can be 10, 8 plays. Like, you get in a rhythm. And I feel like sometimes when you have too many, I hate to say too many, but when you have a lot of players sharing time and rotating in and out, you don't ever really get a flow of the game. And so, say we're rotating in, 2 series. Those could be 6 plays. That's not really a lot of time to get in the flow of a game. And then if it's like run on first down, gain of 1 yard, then you're passing probably 2 plays in a row. So really you can't get in a rhythm, can't really get a lather. And I think that can be really hard for a running back. And then all of a sudden the next series you're out. I'm not sure if that's contributing to the struggles. I have no idea. But I know as a running back, I like to get in the flow. And not personally, as a starter, I didn't like coming off the field. You
You
know,
never did in 2005.
and if honestly, I would, if there's plays off, I would look to Coach White and say, I just need one, I need two. Let me catch my breath for a second. But I took tremendous pride in my conditioning and being able to play and finish games, even for a guy that was barely 200 pounds. Had took a lot of pride in that, and so I think some of the struggles would be like, all right, if Ches is only getting the first drive or first two drives, and then Walker's getting the next drive, and then it's kind of back and forth yo-yo. You don't ever quite get in the flow, and sometimes that can be frustrating. As a ball carrier.
No, that's really interesting because do you think that's maybe why the staff has had a harder time mixing Dupree in or even Yakameli in? Like they're trying to get Ches on track.
I think yes, because he's a senior. He's gone through some pretty horrific injuries the last 3 years. So sometimes you could be kind of like round, square peg in a round hole, right? You're trying to force him to get him going, but then it's like, well, you also got to look at the game flow. Game flow's not great. We're already down, or we're trying to work some way other guys in. Cade has probably practiced really well, and he's shown that he deserves some reps. And now it's like, well, you brought in Walker. Ches is healthy right now, and then now you have Cade, and then you have some freshmen. So, you bring in Walker for insurance, but now everybody's healthy. So how do you split the reps? And so now you got to look at practice, how they're preparing. You got to look at how they're grading out in games, and then those running backs got to be ready. If you're going to get 6, 7, 8 snaps, well, you better make it good. Then that spirals down to like, well, this guy deserves more reps, and I don't know how they're going to figure it out. It's a tough thing, but at the end of the day, I would personally go another couple games with kind of the rotation they're going with, and then we gotta make some hard business decisions, unfortunately. And if it's maybe the season's not going, then cool, play the young guys, let them get some experience and go. Because I think we can't continue to be in this gray area, because then otherwise I don't think it's going to benefit our offense at all. Because they are some weapons they're weapons in the backfield, but you can't keep playing just back and forth and everybody's getting 3 reps. To me, that's not a successful formula.
Well, and to your point, it's also not working that well. Like, so
Cool.
if it keeps not working, you gotta. Speaking of that, USC coming up, USC just got beat by Michigan. Michigan kind of ran all over them. Michigan won, throwing the ball 12 times. What are you expecting to see this weekend?
It's funny because right after the first half, I think I tweeted out and I was like, "This is the formula to beat USC, right?" And so I think you got to have a game plan of like, we gotta get our playmakers the ball. Now, how does that look? Does that look like our typical run game? It should look like a typical run game, and it doesn't have to be all in shotgun. It could be under center. Like, we can go under center. That's okay. If you look at programs that are kind of still like the old school, like Michigan has a modern version of power football, right? They throw the ball. They have spread concepts. If you look at other places like Utah or other places, they still run the ball, still have a fullback, but they have modern pass concepts. For a team like USC, we need to still run the ball, mix it up, shotgun, under center, jet sweeps, draws. Those are all extension of the run game, but we need to run the football. Then you run the ball enough, then you can go play action pass. You can go quick game to your skill guys on the outside, and then take some deep shots. I feel like we haven't taken a lot of deep shots in the last 2 years. And so therefore, if you're just going to dink and dunk, and then you're going to try to run the ball, and those aren't working, then the deep game is not going to work. And we haven't done a good job of that. And so I hope we have really just a good game plan of run the ball, play action pass, get the ball to your playmakers, and let them do what they can do.
Well, and I think that game plan, putting that stuff together, those are things that can come out of the bye week. Adjusting a little bit how you attack something. And I thought you made a really good point. There's a lot of extensions to the run game. We've targeted Ches Malusi 9 times, mostly on kind of those swing passes. Those are extensions of the run game as well.
Yeah.
But if that's all you're doing, then it's all essentially the run game.
Correct.
We have to challenge them. Why do you think Wisconsin hasn't been able to do that?
I I don't know, and,
I don't
and
either.
I think that's what most people struggle with, um, and I just feel like coming in almost 2 years ago, saying air raid has been a disservice because it's not like we throw the ball 50, 60 times all across the yard, right? And so I think people have this perception of what air raid is, but it's not quite what we're doing. So then people are confused, right? So are we air raid or are we actually running the ball? Which I've said that I feel like we have a lack of identity problem because what are we, right? What can we hang our hat on? I think our O line is actually playing really well.
I
I think
agree.
I think the offseason hire um, of the new O line coach has been really great. And so let's lean into that. If you watch 3 games of film, you're like, you know what? Our O line's playing at a pretty high level. Cool, let's lean into that. If we got to scheme some of our players open, then let's lean into that. Then you should be like, all right, what are we lacking? We're lacking some deep throws. So then let's take 3 to 5 deep throws, whether we connect or not. At least let's put that in the game plan because now the other team has to scout that and then maybe we are successful in that. And so then deep throws open up intermediate throws that open up the run game and vice versa. But we have to have all that. And I feel like that's something we're lacking. I guarantee if you looked at the sheets from the game, how many passes we have in the first 3 games that have gone over 20 yards in the air. Probably not a lot. And so I think that's the frustrating part. It's like, well, what are we? We don't push the ball down the field. If teams know we don't push the ball down the field, then cool. We can just play a base defense, cover 2 defense, or something super basic, or cover 1 and say beat us, but you can't because you haven't shown it. And then we just play, 6, 7, 8 guys in the box, and it's like, well, they're not going to run the ball. They haven't committed to run the ball. So then, how do we actually attack a defense? And I think that's the part that I struggle with because I'm like, man, we don't have an identity, and I think that's kind of a slap in the face for people who know the old Wisconsin because now we're the new Wisconsin-ish type of
Mhm.
philosophy, and then nobody knows what we are or what we do well, and I think a lot of people are struggling with that.
Yeah, that's a great point because for the longest time, Wisconsin was nothing if not an identity, right?
Right.
Good or bad, and there was some bad, but there was a lot of good, but there
Hmm.
was always an identity, and it felt like Wisconsin going into a game knew what they wanted to do, and now it kind of feels like a little bit of, you're pulling cards out of a deck, and you're like, this play." I'm
Yeah.
not saying that's the case, but
Yeah.
that's kind of what it feels like at times.
There's no flow
Mhm.
to what we're trying to do. And so most offenses usually the night before the game, you meet with your offense and you have kind of a opening script type of meeting where you literally have the first 15 plays on a call sheet and you watch each play as an offense. It might be a clip from last year, it might be a clip from previous games. You watch each clip because you know the game plan, you know what you want to do. In years past, I think you knew what you wanted to do. And then there's obviously situations where you get off script, but I feel like there's no flow currently, and I feel like you don't really know. Just as a casual fan, you don't really know what direction we're trying to go in. Because when Pauline only has you know I don't know 4 or 5 targets, that's not enough, right?
Mhm.
When we're only, Ches has maybe 4 or 5 carries, Walker has another 5 or 6 carries. Well, so what's the game plan, right? And I think a lot of people are puzzled that way. Um, and I think when you line up in shotgun and say you're air raid, I think it sometimes puts us at a disadvantage because everybody runs a version of that. Whereas back in the day, and I hate to be the person that says back in the day, but at least when you were a power football team, that gave you a fighter's chance because not everybody lined up with a fullback that was going to run right at you, right? That gave you a fighting chance against anybody. Now it's kind of like we're in the middle of the pack and we don't know what to do or how to do it, and hopefully we're getting some things figured out over the bye week. Because otherwise, it's going to be a long season. And a lot of people are going to be really frustrated.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you bring up too. More defenses prepare against this style of offense,
Mhm.
whereas previously, and it wasn't perfect all the time, but at least Wisconsin made you do something different in
Correct.
practice. You weren't used to that level of physicality. We got to take one more quick break. We're going to come back, take some of your questions. I got a bunch of people that submitted questions to
Okay.
BC.
Cool.
Plus, a couple more thoughts on how USC may play out. That's coming up next on Locked On Badgers. But first, a quick break for our friends of the show, returning friends of the show over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is awesome. They're the easiest, simplest daily fantasy sports platform that's out there. You can really, really easily go through and you're just picking less or more on 2 to 6 different player stat projections. You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Plus, they're the only real daily money fantasy platform that has an injury insurance platform policy. Like injuries happen in football. We've seen it with Tyler Van Dyke. You would hate to see your fantasy season or your fantasy day go up in flames because of that. Prize Picks has got you covered with a fantasy insurance policy so your lineups can stay in play even if the worst happens, even if football happens, because that's kind of what football is. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of those picks don't hit. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege and you get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's the code LOCKEDONCollege on Prize Picks. Get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50. It's guaranteed over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, let's get back into this, finish up this show. As always, incredibly grateful to be able to welcome some Badger royalty onto the show with Brian. Where can people find anything you got going on, Twitter, social media? We got your Twitter account down there.
Yeah, Twitter, Instagram is both the same handle. I was at the Alabama game, and I plan on going to the homecoming game with Penn State. Going to Iowa. I got some friends in Iowa City, so I'm go out there. So hopefully, the season gets better. I think it will. I think guys will play better, but I'm all for the Badgers and want them to do well.
What's your gut on this weekend? Like, how do you think this is going to play out?
I think it's going to be closer than 15.5, to be honest with you. But it's hard to say. It's hard to be definitive about any which side. I think we saw some things against Michigan for USC that all right, we can attack and hopefully lean into the O-line and the run game. But if you're being honest, USC still has a higher caliber type of athlete than we do. We're still trying to figure out who we are, and we're on the road, right on the West Coast, which I think can provide some challenges. I think they can. I think they play much better than they did against Alabama. But hopefully things can come together for us to pull out a win.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that. I think it's a better performance. I don't know if they win. I will say this: I think Wisconsin needs a good performance in a big moment.
And I to touch on your point, I think even if we don't win, I think something about Alabama, it's the way it looks, right? I think the first 2 games, although they were wins, didn't look the way, it didn't feel the way I think a lot of people thought it should look, right? Because there's, obviously it's the first 2 games, but there's still some struggles in there. So I think the Alabama didn't look like we prepared, didn't look like we improved on things. Now, obviously, losing your starting quarterback is a big deal. So I think even if it's a loss this week, I think if it looks different and it looks better and looks like we're prepared and looks like we've opened up the offense and the defense can create some turnovers and play downhill, I think if it looks better, people will feel much better about it. But there's no time to lick your wounds because our schedule isn't the easiest. So we got to turn around and play our schedule, which is going to be tough.
Yeah, but I'm 100% with you. I always look back to Pelini at Nebraska. It wasn't so much the win-loss record; it was how he looked in the big games.
Yeah,
like it matters. The perception
it did matter, and I think perception does matter, and that fan base is very similar to Wisconsin, where they expect and the expectation is very high. And so if it doesn't look a certain way in the big moments, then a lot of people are going to be unhappy.
Let's throw some of these questions up here, man, because again, I could keep you for 2 hours. One show I might actually do a carry by carry breakdown of that Michigan game, and it will be 2 hours.
That was 43 carries, I think. So
I think it was actually really quick. Let me ask you a couple of these questions. We're gonna play a very quick game. How well does Brian Calhoun know Brian Calhoun? All right, you ready?
All right.
Highest career receptions against who?
Highest career receptions, Northwestern.
How many?
Oh man, I think I might have had close to double digits. I know that was one of the games unfortunately we lost, but That was the game only in Wisconsin history that a running back has gone over 100 rushing and over
Mhm.
100 receiving. I think I had 10 or 11 catches.
11.
There
That
we
was,
go.
that was,
All right.
that was a monster game. 11 catches and 128, 23 totes for 122.
Okay.
Most carries in your career.
Michigan was 43. North Carolina was in the 30s. I want to say it was Michigan.
Bowling Green had 43.
Oh,
Yep.
Bowling Green. We were in a shootout with Omar Jacobs. I
I
tell you,
remember.
we were down 14 nothing so fast. So fast. But we didn't deviate the plan, and yeah, that was my first game back after redshirt sitting out a year. So
You
I
were
told him,
fresh.
hey, let's just feed me. It doesn't matter. 43, 48, 50 doesn't matter.
You had, I think it's 5 times that 2005 season you had 30 plus carries.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
I mean, we had some games that we were grinding it out.
How many kickoffs did you return in your career?
I didn't do any in Wisconsin. I think I did 4 or 5 at Colorado.
You got 6.
Okay, all right, okay.
You're doing pretty good here. Last one, not to end on a sour note. These weren't ordered this way, but which in the 2005 season, which team held you to the lowest yards per carry?
Iowa. Oh,
Yeah.
it was brutal. I think it was like 17 or 18 carries, 19 carries for like 20 yards. That defense was legit. That was the Chad Greenway Hodge
Mhm.
defense. Um, and I think I remember there was a few plays that I missed some reads on, but they were legit. So I think it was Iowa.
It was Iowa, 1.2 yards per carry, which was one of the only games that year where you
Ooh,
didn't show out. But
ooh.
yeah,
Well, good thing is we went to Hawaii, played well Hawaii. We beat Auburn in the bowl game, so we finished on a high note.
that was a great Auburn. That was a good Auburn team too. You guys
It
beat.
was. It was.
All right, let me bang some of these questions out. You basically crushed that, by the way. I can't imagine running backs now getting 43 carries. That's like pitchers getting 125 pitches.
Right. You just don't see it.
Like it just doesn't happen, man.
No.
All right, here's a couple questions here. This one's from T Badger. How did Colorado convince you to go there first?
So I'm for a lot of people may not know, I'm not originally from Wisconsin. I moved here when I was 12. And so I didn't necessarily have a complete alliance to Wisconsin, the state. And so I didn't know a whole bunch about Wisconsin's tradition with running backs with Ron Dane and Fletcher and Moss. And so I didn't know like I know now, right? Like I understand that right now running back fraternity is Wisconsin, right? It's kind of the echelon of running back play, in the country. So I didn't know that at the time. But the running back coach at the time was Eric Bieniemy, who's obviously
Yeah.
out in UCLA, was at Kansas City for a long time. And so for me, I was cool. Colorado was awesome. I want to learn the running back position from him, who played on a national championship team, played 8 or 9 years in the NFL. For me, it was like, all right, who can help me at the time to be the best running back possible? And so I chose really Colorado from that reason.
That makes a ton of sense. This one's from B. Shetty, man, and this could be a whole show on this too. But how do you feel NIL landscape with a developmental school like Wisconsin?
It's really hard because now you diminish the idea of walk-ons, because now ideally you would want to create a kind of formula of like, all right, we're gonna say take 15 or 20 high school kids every year, and then fill in the rest of the gaps with the portal, which may be 5 to 6, 8 guys. If you kind of the last couple of years, it's been a little bit more than that. And if you always have kind of a swinging door of portal guys coming in, you're not able to maybe develop those guys you want because you got to kind of win now. The idea of coaches taking 5, 6 years to build a program, that's out the window because of the transfer portal and because of NIL. People aren't going to give people 4 or 5, 6 years. You might get 3, figure it out. And so being developed, the walk-on system that we had, there were some great walk-ons that we had. Merrick, Jim Leonard, we've had some great ones. I think you're not going to see less and less of that because, guys got to play and guys got to win. And I don't think you'll see that as much. Plus, if you're a scholarship kid and you're ranked pretty high, then you're going to probably go somewhere where they can offer you the best package possible. And so I miss those days of it being a little more simple. I do understand why players should, deserve a piece of the pie because they're bringing a lot of money. And so I understand that, but it's unfortunate because the old way it's not coming back. So
It feels like we're in the spot between the old way and what is eventually going to be some type of contract, some type of thing that makes sense. And we're in that middle spot, right?
yeah,
Trying to,
it feels so much like the NFL. It feels so much like it's going to be the have and have nots. It's going to be, 30, 40 teams that all can afford this type of money that's being thrown around. And everybody else is going to be kind of like, figure it out. And I don't think that's fair. And that's not the root or the premise of what college athletics is. But I don't even know if we can say college athletics because these guys are
Mhm.
making so much more money.
Well, let me ask you this, man. I'm fascinated to get your answer on this. And again, I've already kept you 5 minutes longer than I was
Oh,
supposed to. So
I can talk about this stuff all day.
feel free to stiff arm me, man. Like digitally, please don't put me because in person that would be a disaster for me. I don't know if you saw this. UNLV starting quarterback Matthew Sluka.
I just saw a quick
So
blurb on it. So can you
yeah,
explain to me what's going on?
fascinated on your viewpoint on this. So 3 games into the season, they're undefeated. For a non-power 5 team, they're actually positioned to be like one of those teams that could fight for that playoff spot. He went into his coach's locker room, coach's office, and said, "I'm taking my red shirt. There were some NIL promises made. I'm going to preserve this season and go somewhere else." Now, there's some the details aren't fully out there. There's some accusations that he's kind of wanting to renegotiate whatever he had, or some other team came in and said, "Hey, we'll offer you more if you redshirt now." There's also some thought that he was promised some things that haven't been delivered upon. My bigger question for you, because we don't have all the details on like, did the school promise him something and not deliver, or is he trying to, hey, in the
Right,
middle of the
right,
season, we're
yeah.
doing well, give me more? My bigger question is if you're in the locker room and we're in the NIL era, you're 3-0, you've spent all offseason building chemistry,
Yeah.
and your teammate may be able to make a better business deal. Like he may be able to go out and get a bigger bag, which is awesome for him. But you're also in the middle of the season. Like as a teammate, man, and obviously you don't know him, you're not in that locker room, but
Duh, man. Um, well, clearly there was poor communication somewhere. Um, whether it was they promised him something, they don't come through, or he's trying to renegotiate, which would be kind of weird because I would, if you're looking for more money, just play the year and then renegotiate after the season. Um, I think as a teammate, you probably want to stay out of it as much as possible.
mhm,
Because you don't know necessarily, unless he's expressed it, you don't know the reasons for what he's doing. Um, Everybody comes from different situations. And so I don't know what well, I guess the word, I don't know what his reasonings or his motivation for doing this. Um, it would be hard to not look at him sideways a little bit to be like, dude, we're in the middle of the season. Like, handle this after the season. But also, at the end of the day, I think everybody understands from financially, like, if you can use the system to your advantage, you should do that. I just think the timing of it's pretty weird. And
mhm.
so, for me not to know more details, that's tough to answer. I think most people would understand, but also it's kind of crappy at the time and juncture of the season because this could be a season where we can make it into the playoff as an at-large bid, and then everybody benefits from that.
Yeah, I think your answer is dead on. It's kind of like, ugh, I don't know. And it feels to me like an NFL holdout, right? Where if you talk to if you hear teammates talk about NFL, they're maybe their teammate holding out. It's generally that answer. It's we'd
Right.
love him to be here. This could be a special year, but I respect him trying to handle his business. And it's kind of that shift towards that NFL mentality again with college sports.
But here's also the thing: like, say you sit out and preserve your red shirt, and you wait for, say, more money, and you go somewhere else. What if you get more money first game? You hurt yourself.
Right.
Now you've gotten money, so you secure your, I guess, financial future. But say it doesn't work out, or say you don't have a good season. Like, I don't know. I think it's tough because if you're in the middle of a special season, you don't get those days and those time back.
Hmm.
You can go to a crappier situation, and all of a sudden it's like, well, sure, I went and got some more money, but the team's not very good. Maybe you get hurt. Maybe that hurts your draft stock, and then now You did that all for, I wouldn't say all for, but now you made the decision based on money. And maybe you're going to regret that 10, 15 years down the road. But like I said, it's tough for me because I'm on the outside and I'm not in the middle of it. Um, you know, and I hate to even think about like if this was around when I was there or when Monty and Melvin and James White and John Clay and all these big time players we had. I mean,
Yeah,
that would have been something because then there would have been some bidding wars on some guys. And I think sometimes your loyalty takes you so far, but it would have been a different time if this was around a bunch of years ago. So I'm glad it's not. But I also understand like those guys deserve to get paid because we brought in a lot of money for the university.
100%. And quite frankly, the answers you probably wouldn't have had all of them, right? You
Correct.
you have that running back stable, man. And it's no shot on anybody. You can go get an opportunity somewhere else and make money. The one thing I'd point out, and I agree with you on this, I think sometimes winning generates a lot more opportunity,
I
right? Like
agree.
being in that opportunity, if you continue winning, I think your profile gets bigger and bigger. Again, I don't know the details either, so I would not stand here and disparage anybody on either side, but that's an opportunity, man, undefeated in a spotlight, starting to build some exposure to just say, I'm going to walk away from this.
Right. Right.
I don't know.
Because guess what? There's going to be a whole bunch of people in the portal.
Hmm.
And what if there's some starters right now they're going to be in the portal, which is going to happen, and then you don't really have the picking that you thought you would, and maybe you don't even get the money that you thought you would.
Yeah, it's a
That's a big
risk.
risk. It's a big
Risk.
risk.
All right, let me throw a few more up here again. We talked about the eligibility, Cujo. That is a no, unfortunately. We did talk about kind of the take on the Badgers moved in the right direction. This one was from Ron B. Have you ever had any interest in coaching football
You mean at the college level?
or college, high school? I know you're involved heavily track and field.
Yeah, and I've coached at the high school level a few years ago. I was at Brookfield Central, where obviously Joe Thomas, Ben Strickland, those guys went. I coached at my own Oak Creek a couple years ago. I think we have to be the right situation, the right coach, the right structure. I enjoy working with youth, and I enjoy giving any type of advice or insight that I have. But it would have to be the right situation.
This one's from Rob S. Talking about how big of a jump can you take from freshman to sophomore year, probably specifically for those running backs. And then do you need on-field reps to grow, or can you get there from just the practice reps?
I think a lot of players take a big jump from freshman to sophomore year, especially if you did not enroll early. Just how to, and I'm speaking from my experience, how to do school, right? Balancing that, how to adjusting to a new weight training program, adjusting to studying, adjusting to a new team. Those can be pretty daunting if you're coming from far away, adjusting from being away from home. So I think a lot of players make a big jump from freshman to sophomore year. But it also helps if you have a little bit of success freshman year, because then you're like, okay, I can do this. I can play at this level. Um, I think on the field reps are the best way to prepare. You can take as many mental reps and watch film as much as you can. But when you're on the field in the 20-yard line, in Camp Randall, can't hear anything, and you got to perform that. I mean, that's hard, and it's. I enjoyed it. I thrived, and people always talk about like, well, did you ever like talk trash while you're playing? I'm like, no, I was too focused on what I had to do. I never really heard the crowd. But like when you go on the road and you're playing, we playing. Who do we go on the road that year? Playing at Penn State, right?
Mm.
Like that's one of the toughest places. Like you got to focus on what you're doing. I can't simulate that. You can't play. There's no amount of music you can play in the loudspeakers to simulate, you know, 3rd and 10, and they're gonna blitz, and we're running a screen, and like you can't simulate that. And so I think the best way to learn is game reps. And now you can prepare and be prepared through mental and practice reps, but you got to play to really feel like you're getting the flow and getting better at what you're doing.
Rob S. also throws this out here. Who's your favorite Wisconsin running back of all time? Maybe not the best, but who's your? And this is a tough one.
That is a tough one. I think it's tough to say who's your favorite. it's also like when everybody says like who's the best running back of all time. Well, obviously Ron Dane won the Heisman highest and has a rushing record. That's the highest one. But you look at some of the accomplishments of Melvin Gordon, which is still a crime that he didn't win the Heisman.
Thank
He
you.
ran for 2,500 yards. You didn't win the Heisman. Where Mark Ingram ran for like 1,401.
Mark Ingram had a mid-season.
I digress. I mean, like that's. But you look at Melvin Gordon, things that he did. You looked at Monte Ball, John Clay, Jonathan Taylor. Um, I think James White doesn't get his flowers as much as he should. He was kind of the third wheel in that hog. I like James a lot because his game was very similar to mine. Um, but honestly, I really enjoyed watching Jonathan Taylor play. I really did. And I know that's probably a little bit of recency bias, but I watched him play. Such a good dude. And then to see him have success with the Colts, I mean, like, it was really cool to watch. And I don't necessarily think that he necessarily played it behind the line that was as dominant as
Mhm.
what Monty played. They played it behind like 4 first rounders at one point, right? So like it was really cool to watch Jonathan Taylor. Um, yeah, I would say Jonathan Taylor was really awesome. I think Melvin sometimes gets lost because that was the Gary Anderson couple years, I think. And so people like kind of forget those years because that was between Brett and between Coach Chris. But I would probably say Jonathan Taylor was one of my favorite guys to watch.
That was an awesome answer, man, because you took us through, like, 8 different running backs,
No,
which is awesome.
that covered like 20 years right there.
Dude, I love it, though, because that's part of the fabric of Badger fandom and Badger tradition, right? It's all those dudes, and they all brought something.
They
And
did, and like I said, I'm sorry to cut you off. But
No,
I think
no.
some guys don't get the credit. Like James White doesn't get the credit. Anthony Davis doesn't get the credit he
Uh,
deserves. Like and that's another thing that people don't talk about. It's like, well, why didn't you come to Wisconsin right away? Well, Anthony Davis was a redshirt freshman at the time, right? And so he would have been a redshirt sophomore. I would have been a true freshman. Will they have figured out a way to have both of us play? Sure, but maybe we don't have the same career because we're kind of
mhm.
at the same time, right? Um, but Anthony Davis is so cool. Like when I transferred in, I was obviously sitting out, learned so much from him. Um, he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. Like he was truly an incredible running back, and so you can't go wrong with anybody because it's such a great group of fraternity of running backs, and I think some of those guys don't get the credit they deserve.
Speaking of which, credit they don't deserve, Marine Matt called you the most underrated running back in Badger history.
I appreciate that. I think sometimes I get lost in the shuffle because I was really only there I had 1 year of playing besides the redshirt year. So maybe I don't get the credit. And I still, I still look back and it's like that year in 2006, I don't think anybody thought that we were going to go 12-1. Um, Obviously, looking back now, it's like, yeah, if we're 12-1, yeah, I would have stayed, right? But there's also a lot of transition, right? Coach Bielema was taking over.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of the assistants move on. So we didn't know what type of team we had. A lot of new stars on the offensive line. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think 1 year um, probably doesn't get the credit it deserves, and that was a really stacked running back class with Reggie Bush and Maurice Jones-Drew and D'Angelo Williams, Lawrence Maroney. So sometimes it get lost in the shuffle, but I'm proud of what we were able to achieve in 2005, and I think that season I'll put that up season against anybody. So
Hell yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the 2006 season. I had Roderick Rogers on the show once we were talking about that team. Speaking of underrated, like Badger fans don't remember how close that team was to going 13-0. Like,
right, and I think they finished fourth or fifth in the AP that year. The only loss was a road game in Michigan.
yep.
Um, And so, you always play that game. Like you look back and it's like, man,
You're the reason we didn't go undefeated.
no,
It's you.
I know. But it was a cool season to watch because, like I said, I don't think they get the flowers they deserve. Probably not a lot of high profile guys. Like obviously Joe was a senior, Stockel was a quarterback, but the O line basically was all new starters besides Craig Urbick. I think the receivers were like Paul Herbert, I think Luke Swan. that kind of core group of guys. Like you didn't have a B. Will, you didn't have Jonathan Orr, you didn't have um, Owen Daniels. You had, I think that was like Garrett Graham, I think was the tight end after that, and Lance Kendricks after that, and I think Travis was all in there. But that 06 team was legit.
I remember that team's defense. I think like Shaughnessy was on that one. Rogers.
Yeah, that was
I think,
Shaughnessy, Casillas.
yeah, Levy. I think
all those guys. Yeah,
I think you had 4 or 5 NFL guys on that defense.
Yeah, they were legit.
If they had just had a multi-purpose running back come back, that team. Oh, I got one more question for you here. Sorry, man. Like I said, I could keep you all day. This is from Ryan Bliss. A couple of people actually asked a version of this. I think it's really interesting. People talk about the notion that coaches need time. Let a coach get his guys. Ryan is saying some media say that the idea of let a coach get his guys doesn't exist. In other words, where are you at on this? Like, a new coach comes in. We talked about the portal. Like, what is the fair expectation of A, let a coach get his guys, or B, that's not the era we live in anymore?
I think there's 2 ways to that. Number one, I think there are certain players that fit certain schemes in what you're trying to do on either side of the ball. It's easier to do that in the portal. You can kind of get guys to pick what system you're running. The problem is that usually the guys in the portal are in the portal for a reason. So now it's like, well, yeah, I'm able to get guys, but maybe that's not the very top tier guy. Maybe that's just a middle tier guy. I think that's fair. But to say let a coach get his guys, what does that mean? Because if you use that example currently, our entire offensive skill were guys brought in.
Mm-hmm.
So then where's your excuse, right? You have a running back in Walker, a running back in Ches. Now Ches has been here a couple years, but he was brought in. Pauline, Green, Williams, all are guys that were brought in. So what does that mean? So I think, yes, there are certain players that fit certain schemes better, but it's also the coach's job to morph whatever your offensive scheme or defensive scheme or philosophy is to the players and what they do really, really well, right? Defensively, Hunter Wooler is a previous regime. Hallman's a previous regime. Curtis Neal's previous regime. James Thompson, now he's hurt, previous regime. Chaney. So, like, I get frustrated because they're like, and obviously, you know, I played with Barry. I played for Barry. I played for Coach Chris. So, like, obviously, and I'm really good friends with Jimmy. So I feel a certain type of way. So I hate when people say, well, wait till he get his guys. His offensive skill guys are all his guys.
Yeah.
We've gone through 3 quarterbacks are his guys, right? 2 stars, Tanner, TVD, and now Locke, his guys. Recruiting wasn't where it used to be. I agree. I think he's done a really good job recruiting. I think they've done tremendous jobs. 100%. But, like, the guys you're leaning on, especially on the defensive side, those are all the previous regimes had. So is it get your guys, or is it the lack of development, or is it the right guys we got in the portal? Like, we can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, he didn't recruit. I agree there was probably some missteps in recruiting previously, but some of your biggest contributors on defense are from the previous staff.
They all are.
We can't have it both ways. And so that's where I get frustrated. It's like, we got to develop. We got to bring in the right guys. And then we have to morph what we believe in as a staff to the guys we have. And like I said, you're not going to get 6 years to do this. You're just not. You know, you might not get 5. The way we're playing, you might not get 4, right? Like, you have to figure it out. And so that's on the coaching staff and as a program to figure out which direction you want to go in. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully that made sense and answered the question.
No, dude, this is awesome answer. And that's why, like, I'm always thrilled to get you on, because I think everybody that listens to this show, myself included, gets smarter by being able to pick your brain. So very appreciative of you, man, as always.
I appreciate you having me. I could talk all day.
No, let's do it again. Like,
absolutely.
I'll get a little behind the scenes. I'll get a little locked on ticker. It'll be like, hey, your show went a little long. I'll be, I had Brian Calhoun on. It'll be, no, okay, got it. No worries. So he is Brian Calhoun. I am Ryan Herrings. Thank you as always for tuning in to Locked On Badgers. Wherever you're getting it, wherever you're finding it, appreciate the hell out of all of you. On Wisconsin. We'll talk later.
On Wisconsin.